just the idea of kind of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, and that just it's okay if it's messy. That just trying, like, showing up every day and putting in your best effort for that day, whatever that is.
Mhm.
And then to not, and I think now this period right now is really fun because I think, there is this idea of like what is possible anymore in your 50s or 60s or 70s.
Be measured and structured.
Like a Muppet, like hanging down. So yeah, I put on this trail running camp for military veterans, and Max King came one year to help out with it, and he said that you wanted to go down the downhill running and you wanted your arms to kind of float like a fairy, like a fairy's wing.
Ooh, okay.
And so mine don't look like that so much, but it's more Muppety. But yeah, there's a lot of flailing.
Hey, Todd. Guess what?
What?
We're at episode 10.
Episode 10.
There have been doubters. There have been people who will remain nameless that have, uttered unencouraging words towards our podcast. But I never thought, when we recorded episode 1 that we would be here already. Episode 10. And what an episode we had.
What an episode we had. We had Liza Howard on. And for those who may not know who Liza is, this is going to be a great episode. She
Wonderful.
is an amazing ultra runner, an amazing person, great energy. And like all the folks that we had on the other 9 episodes, it's all about balancing work, life, children, relationships, friends. And Liza's fantastic because what did she say about the balance, Mark?
What I really picked up is that it's okay to make mistakes. That's how you sometimes learn. Like, experience is the way to, improve, to learn what not to do the next time. And I feel that's how I kind of move through life as well. So definitely took a few notes from her, nuggets of information and what she shared. And I think I'm that much closer to considering running, perhaps not a marathon, but maybe I'll do something a little bit longer when I work my way up to it. Once I graduate past 5 to 10 kilometers, we'll see. Let's see what happens.
Well, we're going to get you out to the Dusk and Dirty trail race on July 20th.
Oh,
So
that's right.
that's in our calendars. That's a trail race put on by the Runegade Podcast. So July 20th. I'll put that in the show notes. You're right. So like Liza, like exactly what she was talking about. Experience is the best teacher. And she says she's experienced every disaster you can ever imagine.
Everyone.
And that's what made her better. And it makes her this runner that she is.
Mhm.
And the other thing that kind of like stuck out at me was the balance. She said, there is no balance. And isn't that funny? Because everyone in life is like striving to like find this perfect balance. And what Liza said is, you're not going to find that balance. And just be at ease with that. I like that.
Absolutely. So definitely an awesome episode. We just finished recording it, and I know that our listeners will enjoy it. So thank you again for dialing in again this week, and we really hope you enjoy the show. 9 times out of 10,
Excellent.
I mess up the intro, so
All right.
we have to sometimes do it all over again. But
No pressure.
it's all
Mark,
good.
no pressure.
Oh, I know. But if you're welcome to the Runegade Podcast. As always, I am your co-host, Runkle Mark, and today, as always, the other co-host is
Todd Marentette.
And Todd, we have an excellent guest today. What can you tell me about her?
Well, today we continue on with having amazing guests on the podcast, and we have Liza Howard. Liza Howard, I would say, has an amazing resume, a running resume, and she has an amazing life. A wife, a mother, a full-time job, amazing running story. And that's really, Liza, when we were, I was reading the Ultra Running magazine, I think it was the February edition, and I'm, going through the pages, and something really popped out at me. It was like the age group performances of 2023. And I looked at it and I said, Badger 100 mile in 16 hours and 50 minutes. And I started doing the math in my head. I'm like, that's like 6 minutes a kilometer, 10-minute miles for 16 hours and 50 minutes. How is that possible? I've done a 50 miler in 12 hours and I couldn't even imagine it. And I'm like, Liza Howard, 51-year-old. And, I'm getting close to the 50s. And I'm like, this is fantastic. We really want to know what the secret to keeping running healthy, strong, how to train, and how to continue on. And you're a running coach. So, you know what? Mark and I were jotting down all kinds of coaching questions for yourself. So we just want to thank you for coming on, Liza. And we really want to understand and hear your running journey. So welcome.
Thank you all so much for having me. I'm like stressed that we might talk in kilometers and I might just fall apart, but
we can convert to miles. We're pretty good. We're close to the border.
Really, though, if we don't go to anywhere near Celsius, I should be okay.
Okay. We'll stay away from Celsius.
Very nice. And you know what? I know that part of that question there that Todd had was like, what is that secret sauce? And, coming from just starting running, for me, I'm just starting to get the lay of the land. But something I do know is that whether you're running an ultra or just an easy 42.2, there's an athletic brew for you. So,
Nice.
Liza, we're unofficially unsponsored. We're not sponsored, but we hope that one day we will be. So today I'm enjoying the Run Wild IPA. And did I see that you had some on your side as well too?
No, it's not athletic.
That's okay.
Yeah, but it is a non-alcoholic beverage.
That's wonderful. Well, cheers, and we again are so happy to have you here. So, how have you balanced everything that you have on the go on your daily life with, all the things that Todd mentioned there? You have, and then to just get training in for running long distances. It must be quite the balance that you have.
Yeah, there's no balance. I think.
No.
Is that the secret? There's no balance?
Yeah, that's the secret.
We know.
Disaster.
Yeah,
I feel like my shtick is definitely like, I have managed to do things in a really messy way, and that can also be an inspiration to people. Where it's like, look, she seems to be a disaster, and yet if she can do this with her mess, then certainly I can do this as well. And so that has been my journey. I think when I started, I've been running ultras for about 20 years now, I think. And when I started, my kids were little, and so that was a mess. And it was kind of a catch as catch can. And now they're older and I'm older. And so now that's a different adventure. And it's a mess. And so there is no, so I don't have any secret sauce. I really wish I did. I did a series of interviews for I Run Far a couple of years back where I interviewed a lot of age group athletes that were performing really, really well. And the reason I did it was because I was really hoping to find, they're like, we all drink maple syrup. And I'd be like, awesome. I will drink that as well. And it'll all be good. But unfortunately, that was not the case. And it seems like for most people, it's just kind of doing all the things that we know are useful, right? Like, lifting weights and doing mobility work and getting good sleep and all that. But you actually have to do them now, if you want to perform as you're older. And it seems like it's fairly unique to each individual, like kind of how much lifting is necessary or how much mobility work and that kind of thing. And so it's this process of not giving up on goals and then figuring out what's necessary to make them happen. I think that a lot of older athletes if you're just swimming in this water of like, well, it's not possible anymore because I'm older, like we all slow down. And so like people circumscribe what they're going to put out there as goals. Or if they have bad runs, they chalk it up to, well, I'm old, rather than like a younger person would be like, what's wrong? I got to fix this thing. And so kind of trying to figure out like what is fixable. And not in a way that you're like kind of fighting against getting old, like it's fine, like it happens, but just kind of figuring out like what is possible for this body. And, you have people who are doing like exceptionally fast times and big races. And so it's like, well, I mean, for their bodies, it's possible. So maybe it's possible for mine. And so kind of going in. Yeah. And so just trying to figure out what are the things that I have to do that are going to allow me to do the things I still want to do. So, yeah.
It's amazing. It's one of those things where I have not ran a race yet, and Todd has encouraged me to, or at least to go out and start volunteering to support in that. And so, for somebody like me, the longest I think I've ever ran is about 12 kilometers. so seeing the mileage that you've racked up there, and I can only imagine in any given week, are you putting in like 100 miles of just continuous training, or is that
No,
no?
I've never done a 100-mile training week. You get, I think people get a real kind of misperception of like what people are running, because the people who are posting on social media are posting these big weeks, and then they don't post when they're injured. So
Yeah, fair enough.
but, I've trained people for a really, really long time. And then personally, like, you can run really well at ultra marathons on 40 miles a week, 50 miles a week. My sweet spot has always been around 70 miles a week. But it just, like, it really varies what you need to do. And which is great, right? Because not all of us have time to do 70 miles a week or 60 miles a week or 50 miles a week. Maybe we could do 40 or 35, so.
Well, that's something that was really interesting. So these amazing performances and averaging, average 70 miles per week. What would a week look like? Like, what would a Monday run versus a Tuesday run? Are you out there having fun? Is there structure to it? Are you doing speed work? Or are you just looking for time on your feet, Liza?
Well, so I would say that, like, it really varies. So coaching, I do a lot of calls throughout the day. So the days vary a lot. I try to do it in the morning because I'm a morning person, and by the end of the day, I'm just crushed and worthless and can't shove myself out the door.
Same.
And also too, living down here in San Antonio, Texas, it's just god awful hot. And so trying to get it done in the morning makes it, you'll run faster if it's not quite as miserable. But yeah, it really varies, because when you have kids and things like this, things just kind of crop up. Like this morning, I had some great plans, and then the highway was shut down due to an accident, and I was like an hour behind where I thought I was going to be driving the kids to school. And so it's a lot of like, so what I do is I figure out what time I have available during a week. Like, I'll figure out like, hey, I'm going to sleep 7 hours a night. And then I'll work back from there with my work commitments. And then I'll say like, okay, this much is, and family commitments too, right? And then I'll be like, okay, so this is what I have. And then figure out how to parse that out and divide it between like running and lifting and, whatever.
That's a great way to do it, though. That's a great way that's the first I've heard of like starting with the time available and I liked how you said you started with sleep. Sleep's very important, and then work backwards. I like that concept.
It's so frustrating otherwise, right? Like, because we have because we're not, full-time paid athletes, we have a lot going on. And so if you look at it, we're like, oh, here's the time based on my priorities, right? And my obligations that I actually have. Then it's easier to do that. And it's like, well, look, I only actually have 40 miles a week available, like at the speed I run. And so I'm going to make the best use of them. And then what does that look like? And so as far as me, like I have been doing more speed training just because it seems like, like as I get older, it seems like I need to focus some more time on that. But my next run is nothing where I need to run particularly fast. And so I'm starting to change into just adding more miles.
That's amazing. So what was that point? You said you've been running ultras for 20 years. What was that tipping point where you said to yourself, hey, you know what? Was it that you got marathons down, or you didn't find them as interesting anymore, and you're wanting to go the longer distance? Like, what triggered in your mind that you wanted to start going the greater distance?
I was a little turned off by the marathon scene and just kind of, being pigeonholed by like how fast you were or how good you looked in your running clothes and that whole, like, I just, in the crowds at races. And so I had been a little turned off by that. And then I teach for the National Outdoor Leadership School. And so I was working a course up in Alaska. You get really close to the people that you work with. And the fellow I worked with was like, hey, you run, we should, do some big run. I was like, that sounds great. And so we ran the Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim. And it was super fun. Like, I had so much fun. And And then the next season, he was like, we should do an actual race. And I was like, yeah, let's do that. And it was just such a great different scene. Like nobody cared like how fast you were going or what you were wearing. And I had a great time, and like randomly I did okay. And so then it was just kind of, I was talking about falling in with the wrong crowd here in San Antonio. And if they had been doing other stuff, maybe I would have been doing that. But yeah, I just fell in love with the people, and it kind of, they were just great. And it was an older crew here who had been running a really long time, and they just had just kind of great perspective. And it was that kind of community, like family. So,
something you were saying there, like rings true. I would say that the same thing that we see here, the marathon, when I first started running maybe 5 or 7 years ago, was a little bit different. It's getting more inclusive, a little bit more diverse, a little bit more laid back, which is thankful, because the stress level at that start line sometimes is way too much to run a certain time. And the trail running culture is so appealing. This is our 10th episode, and we've had some really good trail runners on having conversations, and they're so welcoming. They're helpful, and we could just see them on a trail being that same way. So the cultures are different, and you're right. Hopefully the marathon becomes more open and more inclusive, but we love trail running. And what better way to spend an afternoon than hanging out on the trails? So your first kind of trail run or big trail run was the rim to rim with your friend. Is that, and then how did the bug go from there, Liza? Because your running resume is unbelievable. So walk us through that progression.
It really was just my friends here. They were like, hey, there's a 50K. You want to run with us? And I was like, sure. I don't know how far that is, but sure.
That's that kilometers. Yeah, that's that metric system.
Sure. And then they were like, yeah, and there's this 50 miler. And I was like, great, let's do it. And they were like 100K. And I was like, that's twice of the distance. I didn't know. Sure. And then it turned out like I had some facility for it. And so that was really fun because my kids were really young, and I was new to San Antonio and city life, and was just feeling really out of place. And so it was like this lovely, like, hey, look, you're good at something. Like your house is a disaster, your kids are messy, but you did okay running in a straight line for a long time. And so then I just kept, it was fun. I just kept doing that.
Todd, once again, I can see that you're glowing today because you're wearing another Path Project shirt. I have not seen you in a t-shirt that's branded anything else. I mean, it looks great. I'm sure it feels great.
Feels great too.
I mean, what can you tell me about that one?
You know what? We have a great friend of the podcast, Path Projects, and they make premium running apparel. They got great designs, nice cuts. The material's soft, it's performance-based. It's got some anter. Is that a word, Mark? Anter? It's got
anteater?
It's an anteater. It's got some anti-odor resistance.
I need that.
Is it anti-odor resistance, or is it just odor resistance? I don't know. I think, is that a double entendre?
Yeah, that'd be like saying de-thawed, right?
You got to de-thaw something. No, anyway, I love my Path Projects. You know what? They've been a great supporter of the podcast, and you can use the discount code Runegade10 for 10% off your order from Path Projects. They're dropping some great new product lines this year.
So you mentioned the rim to rim. Are there any races that just stick out in your mind of being the most beautiful, or maybe you've done them multiple times in a row, but just the scenery or just the overall experience, just something that's breathtaking? Like, what's your most favorite race you ran? Or is there one?
That's hard. Yeah, it's hard. One of the ones that I love is Badwater. So that's the one that's 135 miles in Death Valley. And I'll get to do that one again in July. And there's just something about just the austerity of that place. It's just you're to be able to kind of see where you're going for that long. It's like one of those old running posters. You look down the road, but for like 10, 15 miles, and just the solitude of that you feel there. But then also the way that the race works is that you have a crew that's taking care of you. And so it's these, dear friends. So it is kind of also a group activity. and so it captures kind of both parts. It's wonderful because it captures kind of both parts of trail running, right? It's like you're in this place that you get to run through that's gorgeous, and that tests you, kind of mightily, but then you're also with people who are supporting that endeavor and taking care of you. So it's all, so it's great. I like that race a lot.
Well, for our listeners, that we have some experienced listeners, they'll know what Badwater 135 is. It's a race that I've read about that for some reason, Liza, scares the heck out of me. So could you walk us through, what Badwater 135 is for those newbie runners? Maybe Mark has never heard 130 Badwater, but I think he has because he was mentioning it. Isn't that the race that Goggins ran? And I'm like, I think so, but I think Liza has run it multiple times. So help us understand this Badwater.
Yeah, so it's this great race that goes from Badwater Basin in Death Valley, which is the lowest point in the continental United States. And it's 282 feet below sea level. And just recently, there was a lake there. It was in the news recently because they had this weird storm, and water actually collected there for the first time in forever. And people were coming from all over to go kayaking in this really low lake. And then it got windy, and the lake moved down the valley. So anyway, so it goes from there, and it's a road race. And so it goes 135 miles towards the base of Mount Whitney. And so, which is the highest point in the continental United States, and doesn't go to the top anymore. It used to. They decided that the Park Service or whoever is in charge decided that seemed ridiculous. And so it goes to the base of Mount Whitney. So it's 135 miles and you stop. And you gain a lot of, there is a lot of elevation. It's about 14,000 feet of elevation or so. Okay. So yeah, that's the reason. It's hot. It's in July. And so it's 120 degrees Fahrenheit sometimes. That's it.
So what do you do to keep your head in the game during a race like that? There must be points where you're like, why am I doing this? I need to stop. I know you mentioned, the camaraderie of the team, you have support in that, but there must still be long lengths where you're just by yourself. So are you counting things in your head? Are you solving, the world's problems in your brain? What do you do to keep yourself entertained?
Absolutely.
So strangely, you're not often by yourself for long periods because you have this team that's cooling you off constantly.
Okay.
So every 2 miles or 3 miles or so, you'll have the crew in the minivan will, drive up ahead and stop, and then they'll run across the street and they'll spray you down and give you ice and cold things. And then you'll see them again, so you are having, there's not a lot of solitude, but yes, you are thinking. And I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure. What was I? The first time I did it, I made a huge mistake and I ended up drinking too much water and got hyponatremia. And so mostly I was thinking, okay. I feel so terrible. That's what I was thinking. Wow. But yeah, it's, I think a lot of that race, like anything, you break it up into little pieces and you're thinking about executing a particular part of the race,
Very nice. And the crew that you use, does it change up every time for the different races, or do you have your go-to folks that are just there to support you? I'm trying to recruit Todd as my crew from my first 5K, and
Badwater 135, baby. We'll see.
I'm just envisioning him driving by in a little minivan with a fan out the window, just blowing me down, and spritzing me with water.
Usually it's just dear friends, people,
that's great.
and the people it's a super fun thing to do. Mm-hmm. And so people will volunteer to just be part of a crew just to gain that experience of kind of helping somebody through the desert and kind of understanding what they might need to do if they were gonna run it as well. Yeah. So I'm super fortunate with the folks that I have. They are very talented, very funny, and have a high tolerance for me. So it's good.
Now, is the stories true about Badwater where your shoes will melt if you're not running on the white paved line? Is that true? Did your shoes ever melt?
Back in the day, what would happen, the glue, they delaminate, right? The glue that they were using to keep the sole on would melt, and so that the sole would come off. And so the shoes are better built. And so that's not happening.
Oh, okay. Oh.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it's hot. Like my dad was stationed in Saudi Arabia, and people would ask the temperature, and he'd be like, "Oh, it was like 130 or whatever," and they would be like, "It's a dry heat, right?" He was like, "It was hot. It was really hot." So the shoes aren't melting, but it's hot enough. So.
Oh, fantastic! Now, Liza, when you first started running and you started racing, and you realized, hey, I'm pretty good at this. Walk us through the progression. Like, where was your mindset? What was your training like back then? How did you view training and racing? And has that view changed over the years when you look back at the start of your career as you were starting to ramp up all your race performances?
I didn't have very structured training. I would just run with the group. Like we would do long runs on the weekends, and I would just do whatever anybody else did. And it just turned out like I had a facility for not running really fast, but I could keep going at that pace. And so it was like, if you tried some random sport and it turned out you were okay at it, like, oh, look, I'm not a bad highlight player. Like who knew? I've never tried it. And so there was that talent, and I didn't know anything. I hadn't been like a runner in high school or college or anything like that. I had like done marathon training, but I didn't really. And then there was less known about how to train for ultras too, less written, and so it was kind of this mystery, and it just seemed like running a lot was the way to do it. But like I didn't know exactly how much I was running. I would drive routes sometimes to try and figure out how long they were, or like the string on the map and trying to figure out back in the day. But yeah, so it was so it wasn't very structured, and certainly no speed work or anything like that. And now. It seems like those things are more necessary in order for me to kind of keep doing what I want to try to do. So,
were there certain elements that were really challenging early on? Like you mentioned overhydrating, or were the elevations something like that you struggled with, or did you learn anything along the way from peers, coaches? Do you use the poles for going up elevations? Like how
right.
I know some people they stayed away from them for a while, but then they embraced the poles. So it just how did you find your way through, and like what were some of the hard lessons you learned along
I
the
just
way?
made so many mistakes.
Yeah. Okay. So you just make them all and check them off.
After mistake after mistake. And then I would try not to do them again. Yeah, no, like I ran with folks who had been around a long time. And so, you'd have these long runs and they would just tell you about mistakes they had made and experiences that they had had. And so learning through that. And then trying to think, and then reading whatever was out there, and just doing a lot of racing and seeing kind of what worked, and then things would change, like the things that people were eating would change, and so you tried something new that way. It was all very haphazard. And I like how you were like, like when you made this mistake of over drinking, like I continue to make these mistakes for the athletes I coach so that they don't have to suffer similar.
You try it first.
Yeah.
Well, experience is the best teacher, they say, Liza. So
That's
we're
right.
with you.
So
I was going to ask this question. One of my friends, he was getting ready to run his first 100-mile coming up, and he was kind of worried about hallucinations and more of, I'm going to be tired, and what are hallucinations like? So from a coach and someone who's run lots of ultras, how do you help somebody come to terms with how could they minimize the hallucinations? I can't even say it. or can you avoid it, or maybe rest a little bit longer? Like, what's the coach's advice?
I mean, I think if you're going into a 100-mile race really sleep deprived because of your job, right? And then you're set, and then you're going through the night because of that. Then that could set you up for having hallucinations, surely. And so the way to approach it is just to try and get as much sleep as you can that week before, so that you're starting fresh, and then hopefully, usually folks are getting hallucinations more that, like, it's usually after that 100-mile distance for a lot of folks that it'll happen if they go in rested, and then it's kind of one of those things where, like, if that's happening, it's lovely if you have a pacer to, kind of confirm that you're not seeing, whatever it is that you think you're seeing. But as long as your kind of eyes are focusing and your legs are working, then, it's okay to continue on, generally. But that if, you're having trouble focusing your eyes and things and you're stumbling, then just laying down and, taking that 5-minute nap or just that 5-minute rest with your eyes closed usually helps things to dissipate.
And so what are some of the stories? I think this is the first I'm really hearing about these hallucinations. So are people seeing like Jim Morrison and they're just getting life advice, a spiritual awakening, or is it just more delirious and, dizzy? They actually see anything like Bigfoot? Like what happens?
Usually it's things like, people think they see snakes, like the roots will look like snakes, or the shadows, it'll look like something in the shadows. Usually they're not like...
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, not Jim Morrison.
Not Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Mark.
Right. I have a really good friend who always hoped to have hallucinations. Like he didn't drink, he didn't do drugs, and so his like only route to hallucinations was going to be through ultra running. He was always like super hopeful that maybe this time he would have some hallucinations. Yeah.
There you go. Ultra running's the gateway drug for hallucinations.
Indeed.
Wow. Well, that's just so we've touched on a couple different areas there with hallucinations, and I wanted to go back to that delaminating shoe thing. So I'm curious, what are you wearing? What do you wear on your feet? Are you loyal to a specific brand? Do you try a little bit of everything? Do you have a shoe and a brand for wet days, trails, road races? Like how do you decide what you wear?
Most of my training right now has been for road races, and so I'm just in a New Balance shoe. I was sponsored for them for a while, and I liked the shoe, and so I've always just it always worked, and so I kept running it. And I'm not good about changing through different models of shoes. Like I think I'm fortunate in that I don't need to do that, and it seems like I don't get injured, because of that. And so, yeah.
And have you kept up with? I know you mentioned that with the New Balance. Have you tried the different technologies over the years, or the zero drops, things like that?
Yeah, I sure have. And I've gone to a shoe that like I've played around with like the carbon fiber plate shoes and things like that, and that's been fun. But the one I go is kind of like more of just an old school, like it kind of feels like there's a little bit of cushion there, and it's pretty simple, nothing exciting. I feel like I'm disappointing you on the shoe question.
No, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So
we might change our philosophy because sometimes we're a little bit too complicated with shoes. But if we can have some of these race performances in a more conventional shoe, we're all for it.
Well, it's just kind of like what works, what works for you or what doesn't work. And so it's like, my shoes tend to hold up just fine and let me do what I want to do. And I do remember like I didn't bring a pair of really rugged trail running shoes one year when I ran Leadville, and I was like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And I ended up running it in road shoes, and it was fine. And I was like, wait a minute, it's all lies.
Wait a second. You've done the trail
Leadville isn't a particularly rugged trail. That was the issue. And it was dry and all of this, but it was kind of like, oh, well, a lot of things can work. You don't, have to do particular things because, the shoe people tell you.
It's keeping it simple. Maybe folks are thinking a little bit too much, and thinking gets us all into trouble, at least me into trouble. So yeah, keeping it simple. I love this. So you ran Leadville, and they say this is one of the hardest ultras in the world, the Leadville Trail, because of elevation and the route, the trail. And you ran it in road shoes. I love this.
Not intentionally, but yeah.
Not intentionally. Well, maybe it was, Liza. You never know. And you've gone back multiple years, and you've had great performances at Leadville. Walk us through that. Like, what's the draw to Leadville, and how do you kind of look back at your performances, and how did you perform so well at Leadville?
I taught for Outward Bound for a while, and so they had a base in Leadville, and so I became familiar with the race through that. It's the race is difficult because the altitude is high, right? So the town of Leadville is at 10,000 feet, and then you're going up to 12,000 feet during the race, and you're just staying high, and so that makes it really difficult for people who aren't living in the mountains. But it's not a really a mountain race is fought in the way that you're getting like an incredible amount of vertical gain at that race. And so it is something that, as long as you can kind of go up and acclimatize, that you could live somewhere flat like I do, and still be able to run well there. Like if you have access to a treadmill to do some, uphill, a little bit of uphill running. And so, so I went up there and did well and fell in love with it. And then just kept going back for years and years and years, either accruing, or pacing or running it. And so, that's what I've done. And I did notice recently, I got to tell you, so like Ultra Sign Up doesn't have my right stats on there. I did another podcast and they were like, so you won twice and you came in second and then you came in 13th. And I was like, no, I came in second twice. They were like, no, you came in 13th. And I was like, I did not. And then I was like, maybe I did. Have I been remembering this like totally wrong? I've been lying for years. But
it's
anyway,
a hallucination.
So anyway.
Oh, fantastic performances, and I love it. Leading up to the races, leading up to Leadville, you said you lived in San Antonio. So how do you acclimatize to that elevation? What works well for you?
It takes about 10 to 14 days to acclimatize to an altitude. And so I had the opportunity to go up there about 12 days early. And so I just go up, and that's how I'd acclimatize. Yep.
Nice.
Just relax, go there. Some easy training in advance of it.
Pretty much. Yeah. I mean,
no alcoholic beer.
Just go, like, there's no secret there. I mean, I think people get into trouble. And one of the reasons, that it has a high drop rate is because people are under the misimpression that you don't need to take that amount of time. And so they've been told, like, you could go there like 2 days earlier, like right before the race, and then you'll be fine. And it's possible that that's true, but it's also possible that you will just be totally, like, usually it takes 24 to 48 hours for the altitude sickness to set in. And so it might work out for you. Like if you finish fast and when you get there, like it might be fine. But it sure might not be. And so it's kind of one of those things where I think a lot of people, because they don't have the opportunity to spend that much time up there, really want to believe that it's going to be okay because they heard, that it'd be okay if they went up like the day before. And so yeah.
Now, was that a lesson you learned the hard way, or did you naturally?
I know, right? Like, I actually teach wilderness medicine for this National Outdoor Leadership School as well.
Oh,
so
nice.
I actually knew that information. But I had also been sick at altitude. Like when I first went to teach in Leadville for Outward Bound, I got pretty sick. So, yeah.
Well, going back to experience being the best teacher, there are a couple things that were terrible experiences, Liza, that were invaluable because they taught you such a great lesson that to this day, it's burned in the memory.
I think being careful about over drinking water. And I think that's, it seems like a real straightforward thing to not mess up. But let me tell you, it's not. Because, what works for you and your requirements in one environment, location, altitude, are going to be different in a different place. And so you can get yourself into trouble pretty easily. And it can be real easy if you're working out in a real humid environment and you're thinking, I need a particular amount of fluid. And that's what I've trained with. And you go into a really dry environment, and then like your oral mucosa is so dry from that environment that you kind of misinterpret the sensation, right? You're like, I'm thirsty. I need to be drinking to, I'm drinking to thirst, and I'm really thirsty. And so it's just easy to take in too much. And so I think I've learned to pay a lot of, to be more precise about recognizing exactly how much I'm drinking during a race and the signs and symptoms of over drinking, so that if I'm feeling those, then I can have a really good knowledge of exactly how much I've taken in to be able to make because the thing, like with anything, like the more overhydrated you get, the lower your blood sugar gets, the colder you get, the hotter you get, the dumber you get, right? Like, and so it's hard in the moment to kind of recognize like, oh, I'm drinking too much, right? And so if you have those numbers of like, oh, I've had this much and that's more than I usually do, perhaps it's this that I'm experiencing. So that's one. I think always carrying some sort of blister kit with you. on your person during long races. And this comes from personal experience, but also coaching, that, you want to be able to stop and fix what a problem is immediately, rather than waiting 5 miles or 4 miles or whatever till you get to the next aid station to try and deal with it. And so, carrying like just exactly what you need on your person, not taking up a lot of space, but that you can take, that you can prevent it from becoming a problem, is big. And then I think, having learned and then working with people too about being really proactive about self-care, that you have to be on top of not letting yourself get too hot, not letting yourself get too cold, that things will snowball, and that you can get away with it in shorter races, you can get away, but the longer the race is, you're digging yourself this hole, if you're not being, rigorous about self-care. I think this is particularly true for people who are training for these 200-mile races now, that you just have to be on top of taking care of yourself, because if you're not, you're just going to be in too big of a hole to finish those races. So I guess those are the 3 things that I've learned. Yeah.
And so do you treat yourself to the spa afterwards, or like massage or anything like that after a big, just to get like a just nice hot tub afterwards? Or like, what is your recovery after, one of these mega races that you run?
I mean, I just am around the house kind of useless. I think that's my
That's Saturday for me.
I try to eat well and, take in a good, keep the fluids high and eat protein and things like that and green things and whatnot. But sadly, my life does not involve a lot of massage and whatever. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, I imagine you're just getting back to the day-to-day afterwards, right? You probably don't have a lot of time afterwards. There's travel back if you're flying somewhere, and then just back to the routine, right? So
I think sleep, it's this super not exciting thing that is amazingly powerful and, what is necessary for a good recovery. So
absolutely.
Do you find after these big races, is your sleep messed up for a few days or a few weeks? Or do you sleep amazingly well after one of these giant events?
Usually the night after is bad, right after the race, right? For so many reasons, you're uncomfortable, maybe your stomach's still upset, you've got weird chafing all over the place, You're so sore. But after that, no, I sleep pretty well. I know other people, I think that it's real common, to kind of have the blues after you've completed a race, regardless of how well or how poorly you've done. This thing that you've been training for is gone. And so that affects people's sleep sometimes.
And
at what point did you make that sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So, there was a little bit of delay there.
Back to, it's the wind-up internet coming back to get us. I was going to go back to see advice you would have for, you talked about hypernatremia, adjusting, running in the heat. Okay. I'm terrible in the heat. I'm like a 1980s car with a radiator that's leaking. I can't cool down. What advice do you have, or what works for you to stay cool in these hot events?
Well, a couple of things. So one, that it takes about 10 to 14 days to acclimatize, just like altitude. And so you get better at it. And so part of it is before a hot race, trying to either run in a hotter environment, and so that you get better at sweating, the composition of your sweat changes, your heart rate is lower, all sorts of fun stuff happen during that acclimatization. And so if you don't actually have hot temperatures, then maybe you're doing some sauna training, or if you don't have access to a sauna, maybe you're in a hot tub, or an actual tub in your house, hot water in that tub, enough to be sweating. So maybe you're following that. So that's really useful, right? So it's not just the first time that you're experiencing this. And then I think during the race, being really aggressive about cooling yourself down with ice, so that you are either using your hydration pack and you're putting ice in the pack. Not so much it's lovely to drink cold things, but that's not really cooling you down internally. It's just nice, right? It makes you happier, which is important for sure. But, putting ice in these front pockets, using that back pocket to put ice in, or having an ice scarf around your neck and putting it under, some people like to have it on their head, other folks find that gives them kind of an ice cream headache. But that ice is like a really, really powerful tool. And so if you can do that, great. If you're not in a real humid environment, then taking advantage of evaporative cooling is really helpful. So like getting yourself wet as much as possible. And then like your perception of how miserable that hot environment is changes your ability to perform in that hot environment. And so doing things like wearing darker sunglasses so it doesn't seem quite as miserable, right? That wrap around so the light's not coming in, wearing a hat that has kind of a longer brim and maybe darker on the underside. So again, it's just like, it's like, I mean, it's like a trick that works of like, it's not quite as terrible as I think. Wearing long sleeves sometimes. So especially in a dry environment, because you can get those wet, so you get that evaporative cooling, but just not having that hot sun hitting your skin changes your ability to be able to deal with that. And then obviously like running slower, you know what I mean? Like you just have to go slower. And so getting used to kind of, I think that it's real helpful to train with this idea of rate of perceived exertion. And so that if like in your environment, kind of like, hey, this is how like kind of a moderate exertion feels like, then you're going to transfer that into this other environment. You're like, this feels a ton harder than what I've been doing in training, and I need to back off,
So you just shared with us a whole bunch of nuggets there. How was your transition?
Cooling on. Sorry.
How was the transition into coaching? Did it just happen naturally? I know, like, have been coaching for how many years now as well, or I guess formally coaching?
I have been coaching for probably 13 years, maybe so. And so, yeah, it was one of those things. I think I'd been running a lot and people would ask advice and I'd give them advice and it was really fun. And I'd, try and help them succeed in whatever they wanted to do. And eventually my husband was like, listen, you're taking a lot of time doing this. You need to earn some money.
That's right. You got to get the side hustle going.
Either the family or earn some money. Yeah. And so, I coached for a little while on my own, and then I hated everything about like the business aspect of it. It just made me sick to be like, could you give me money for this thing? And so I linked up with Ian Sharman, and so have worked with him for most of the time that I've been coaching. And he does all the business stuff, and I just get to help people. It's great.
Well, that's wonderful. It's a good working relationship there.
Yeah.
Maybe like a couple firing round questions that we have on our mind, Liza. Like, what? Are you a Garmin or are you a no watch person?
Oh, I have a Coros. I like it because it's super light and they're tiny. And the battery life is really long. But I have tiny wrists, and so those Garmin's or the Cintos look like I'm wearing a wall clock. So I really like the Coros, and the battery life is great for sure.
So, do you round up your runs to have a nice even number, or are you okay to leave it at an odd number?
Yeah, no, I'm a full-on trail runner. I will when that run is done, it is done. And I do not care. Stop.
What about best piece of advice to avoid chafage? What would you recommend to any new person that has?
Mark is very worried about chafage.
I know,
especially
I know there's tools out there or creams and things like that, but I am just wanting to get as much info as possible to avoid any uncomfortable situations.
So I think for gentlemen, like the half tights are really great, or wearing spandex or whatever they call it, compression, whatever, is really goes a long way. And then you can put shorts on over that if you want to, but that's really, really helpful. Okay. I think for women with sports bras, if they're having trouble like underneath like that, the lower strap, like sometimes lubricants will help, but a lot of times like putting a piece of KT tape there really does a good job. And for sure, like if your hydration pack is giving you some trouble too with the rubbing, then a piece of KT tape is really useful. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate that, and we'll have to tell your husband that we'll send a couple, dollars in the mail for your coaching advice for us too, so we can make it worth your while.
I'll continue on. I got a couple that are on my brain. Do you like uphills or downhills, Liza?
That's a good question. I like technical downhills.
Technical downhills.
I feel like they're scary and fun, and it makes the run go faster because you're worried about death and breaking something.
Are you just hammering those downhills and flailing, having fun, or are you like very
I
measured and
look
structured?
like a Muppet, like hanging down. So yeah, I put on this trail running camp for military veterans, and Max King came one year to help out with it, and he said that you wanted to go down the downhill running, and you wanted your arms to kind of float like a fairy, like a fairy's wing.
Ooh, okay.
And so mine don't look like that so much, but there's more Muppety. But yeah, there's a lot of flailing. Yeah,
Like that.
Yeah.
Mark, this is right up your alley. I think we've been talking about getting into the trail running, so I think you could handle that. No worries.
Well, I'm just thinking about, what do they call them? That it's like that puppet. Well, it's not necessarily a puppet, but like in front of certain stores, they have the fan guy, right? That just
Yes,
like
exactly.
Like that.
Exactly.
That's what I would look like.
Just like that.
I think. Okay, so I have one more question for you.
Okay.
What has been your most favorite food at an aid station that you received at any point in time? Is there anything that stands out that you're like, that was different, but it was amazing, and I wish that I had that every time I was at an aid station?
Okay, well, I'll tell you two. One, when I was pacing at the Massanutten 100, and it was the middle of the night, and they had made little link sausages and wrapped pancakes around them and like stuck a toothpick through it, and it was like to go. And that was like, I was like, this is the best
amazing.
thing I've done my entire life.
I have that right now.
So
Dinner is coming. I have to go cook.
Yeah, so that was great. And then as a runner, slushies. So yeah, those are, that's just so great. Yeah.
Slushies are fantastic. Although I had a slushie during, I attempted a 100-mile a few summers ago with a friend, and met the family. It was really hot. It was the first June, a Saturday in June. It was so hot, and they brought me a slushie, and I downed it, and I must have had low blood sugar. I went down like a ton of bricks. That slushie took me down. Next thing you know, I'm lying in the shade. I tapped out. An hour later, I was fine. I wasn't tough enough. That's really what it comes down to.
You need to do slushy training.
Slushy training, exactly, exactly.
That I could be a part of, I think.
Right? See, this is why you want to do trail running. There's all sorts of tasty treats and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I'll go to 7-Eleven there, Todd, and I'll give you a mixed batch. Get the Coke and the
yes.
What do they call it? Swamp water.
Swamp water would be fantastic. Liza, like who are some of the running heroes that you look up to? Who are the runners that you look at, that you admire, and model yourself after?
One of my favorite people and runners is Megan Canfield. And so, yes, she has been running and performing well at ultras for a very long time. And she is just one of the kindest and most helpful people that I know. I think, she really she epitomizes just the community members of trail running, of the trail running community, and she just, she works hard and plays hard and is, welcoming to everybody and has amazing stories. Yeah. So Megan is the person that I look up to most.
So you've been very candid with your learning and your journey into ultras and that. And so what type of legacy do you hope to leave with the ultra running community? And how do you hope to inspire others to tie up those shoes and go a little bit further than a marathon, or just putting those extra clicks just to try something different, go farther at a slower pace, and just really enjoy the scenery?
I think just the idea of kind of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, and that just it's okay if it's messy, that just trying, showing up every day and putting in your best effort for that day, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And I think now this period right now is really fun because I think, there is this idea of what is possible anymore in your 50s or 60s or 70s. And so I think I would like a little bit of my legacy to be, it's so funny to talk about legacy, but what about my legacy? But just this idea of she kept doing a bunch of stuff, and how cool is that? And I could do that too. If people were interested in doing that, to just be this normal, messy person who people are well, she did. I think that would be a lovely legacy. Yeah.
Well, I find that very inspiring, and you've certainly inspired me
Super
too to
inspiring.
try.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do 13 kilometers this weekend, okay?
Oh,
And then
nice.
we'll go from there.
I'm like, okay. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh,
Well, along
just
those
a little bit at a
lines,
time, right?
yeah. Along those lines, Eliza, we had Katie Azimuth on our last podcast coming out soon, and she talked about how races, runners, events can be more appealing to attract more females to the sports. And what are your thoughts on that? To attract more diverse, more runners to the start line, because we're seeing some amazing performances.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think like fundamentally it needs to feel like it that it's a safe space, right? And so then I think a lot of that is us making it feel like a safe space. And so I think, participating in running groups and things like that, and, being present, showing that the women are doing these things and doing them and that it's not dangerous. Like it can be done in a safe manner, right? Not, you're not getting lost. You're not like, you're not being trailed by bad people, things like that. Like I think there's just the fear of the unknown is there for a lot of people in trail running, especially folks who don't have any sort of like, backpacking or camping background or something like that. But it just is, the wild, education about like, what animals are out there and how to, so I think in part it's education, it's part putting, people like us putting it out there, making it welcome, for folks, figuring out what the fears are and addressing those things. And so that's a big part of it. And then beyond that to make it more diverse. So I told you, like I put on this trail running camp for military veterans. And so I think that each of us look for a way to kind of open the doors to trail running to different communities to make, to look to make it more diverse and more welcoming. And so like I've chosen to do it with military veterans because I come from a military family. And so within that, there's like a lot of diversity of race and gender and age and experience. And so like that's the way that I've chosen to try to address that. But I guess it's like, yeah, it's something where you think about like, what can I do to make it a more welcoming space? And I think, as far as like more women feeling welcome, that's a difficult thing, I think, for like, I don't know how to answer that question exactly for men. I think it's more straightforward for women to be, like, yeah, invite people to run with you, show them what's possible and things like that. So yeah,
it's good advice and it's good share. We both have 2 daughters, and we hope to attract them to join us on some runs. And just to know, leading by example hasn't translated into showing up to a run just yet, but they're teenagers still, and I still hold out hope. And it gives me something to shoot for, that I got to keep running until one day maybe they want to run with me. So I got to stay in shape to be there with them and just to enjoy the trail with them.
I will tell you, I do think like there's a lot of fear or uncomfortableness about like, how am I going to go to the bathroom? And so addressing those kind of things with folks, like, yeah, this is how it, this is what we do, and this is how it's done, and da da da. I think I teach these wilderness first aid courses. There are these 2-day courses, and I think taking something like that makes most folks feel a lot more comfortable in the backcountry and on trails or at trail races as well. Just having a sense of kind of like how to take care of themselves, but then also, how to take care of others if something were to happen. It's real empowering.
That's cool advice. I never thought of that. Yeah,
I think that's a good one.
Course.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
sorry, frog my throat there. Well, I'm just looking at the time, and I know that you've really spent a lot of it with us over the last hour here, and we're really grateful that you took time out of your day. So just in closing, what do you have ahead of you over in the short term? Is there anything over the next 3 to 5 months that you're looking at, and then anything that you're hoping to accomplish in the next year?
I'm gonna run Badwater in July 22nd.
Yeah. July 22nd.
Anybody wants to follow my messy journey?
Yeah.
I'm posting on my training.
That's great. Where can we follow you? Are you on Strava? Are you on Instagram?
On Instagram, yeah. It's just Liza Howard 1, I believe. So yeah. recently it's just been pictures of my cats.
That's great. We love cats. This podcast is a
I have
huge
two
fan
kicking
of
around
cats.
here.
Yeah.
So,
I think they're chewing
so
on the
that'll
cord.
be in July, and then yeah, I'll just put out that so this trail running camp that I've been talking about, it's free to military veterans of all nations, and so it's here in the Texas Hill Country. It's 3 days. We bring in the very best trail runners and coaches and race directors from all over the country and Canada, because Ellie Greenwood comes down to help us as well, and teach folks the ins and outs of trail running. And it's also for surviving family members as well. And so if anybody's interested, they can contact me through bandofrunners.org. So
Excellent. We'll put that in the show notes, Liza,
I appreciate that. That'd be wonderful.
And that's a wonderful organization. Like, you know what? We all find running for different reasons, but we all have a common thread. I've never gone out for a run and felt worse afterwards. It's whatever you're going through, a run just can make it a little bit better. It doesn't say it makes it all better, but some time in the trails, time in nature, it's amazing. So that's a great cause.
Yeah. And just giving people access to the communities that are there so that they feel more comfortable, just to take the mystery away of, it's just making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at these races. Telling people they look good. You can be a part of that. So.
Is there a bigger race that's on your eyes? You mentioned earlier about the 200 miles. I just saw something called the Arizona Monster at 300 miles.
I have no desire to do that. At all.
Desire.
So I'll give you this. So I have a lot of the athletes that I'm training now are doing these 200-mile races, and I definitely was like, I trained you for this, but I do not see the attraction. It just seems terrible. Just the sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
Seems terrible. But then I realized, as I was helping some folks train different sections of a course, I realized that piece that I was talking about, that it is about self-care. You have to take care of yourself, right? And that's a transferable skill. It's just so in your face during a 200-mile race. If you don't, then you're likely to fail. And in life, if you don't take care of yourself, then maybe a decade passes before you're rock bottom, right? And so I think it is this nice training ground of take care of yourself. Small things matter. And so now I'm all in. I'm hey, if you want to do 200, I'm excited to train you. I do not want to do it myself. But, and I'd like to see if I could PR at the 100-mile distance. I think I still have that in me, so I'll try and do that before 2024 closes, I think.
Before 2024 closes. And your PR for the 100-mile, it's just a tad over 15 hours. Is that correct?
I really want to get under 15. That's my goal. And then I'll just stop running.
We know a coach that can help you. Well, when you're running, I'm fascinated here for a second. When you're running 100 miles at 15 hours, that's fast. That's super fast. I'm not a fast runner by any means. What does the run look like? Are you running, let's say, 8-minute miles? You're walking a little bit. You're running that's 15 hours. Are you just motoring for 15 hours, Liza?
If things are going well,
you're motoring. This is unbelievable.
And when they're not, you're laying on benches.
That's usually me.
Thinking about how you went out too fast.
I'm the guy you see on the bench I went out way too fast.
Exactly.
But I didn't go out too fast. That's the secret.
I'm going to tell people about this. I've only had one race where it's been this beautiful, I just chugged along at the pace that I hoped to. And most of the other ones were I went too fast and then I paid for it. And
did it feel long? Did it feel long? Did the 100 miles feel long when you were doing it? Or was it these miles are just dropping and you were like, this is fantastic. It's just moving.
No, it never felt like that.
Okay. Thank God. I was wondering. So there's hope.
She is human.
It's done. No, it's never felt like that.
Okay.
Sadly. Even the very best one, never. No, it always feels long. Yeah. And sometimes you'll lose yourself a little bit, just like anything, but it's still yeah.
That's fantastic.
I have no elixir for you. I have no great story. No shoe recommendation. Sorry.
No silver bullet. That's okay.
You do have great recommendations. It's experience. So it's to get out there, put yourself in lots of conditions, experience it, learn from the mistakes. I'm already probably 40% there, Liza.
You're right. That the people will take care of you. Like people, you will make mistakes and you'll mess up, and people will be out there to take care of you. It's good.
That's fantastic. And so where can folks find you for coaching? You said it was at Charmin
Yep.
Ultra?
Yep. If they go to Charmin Ultra, they can find me there. But for sure, if folks want to talk about the trail running camp, they can get me through Band of Runners. And if they just want to find me, they can, if they want to ask me something, especially about being older and running, Instagram is a good way to do that.
Fantastic. And thank you, Liza. Thank you for putting some trust in us, coming on our show. You're the 10th guest, and this was fantastic. We dove into so many topics, and we really appreciate your time.
This has been lovely. I really, really appreciate it, and it's allowed me to ignore some house tasks. So it's been great.
Oh, great.
Thank you so much.